There are moments when, in just a blink, everything you trusted collapses, and you do not even realize what you have lost until it is already gone. For me, that moment came on an afternoon in April, when sunlight poured through the glass windows, casting shimmering beams across my desk at the old company where I had spent the best years of my youth. My name is Rachel Holm, and for 7 years, I had poured my soul into that media company, a place once celebrated as the cradle of emotional marketing, a place where I believed that if you gave your heart fully, if you stayed true to real values, success would eventually find you. Rachel in those early days was a dreamer, but also stubborn. I started from the lowest position on the creative team, making coffee, taking notes during meetings, listening to the seniors in the industry discuss each campaign as if they were painting dreams on paper. I loved the way they talked about customers, about campaigns that were not just about selling products, but about touching people's hearts, about building lasting relationships rather than chasing numbers. I believed, with complete conviction, that I had found my second home. 5 years later, I became one of the youngest creative directors in the company. I was entrusted with a major campaign, one that, if successful, would push our name beyond the domestic market and mark a turning point for the entire team. I had not slept properly for 3 straight months, working with my team to craft every slogan, adjust every color on each poster, edit every frame of the commercials until every detail was as perfect as I could make it. Alongside me were familiar faces, teammates I had once considered family. Mr. Walker, my senior manager, was someone I had looked up to, a composed and wise man who could steer tense negotiations into light-hearted afternoon tea conversations. Alex, a young intern who had just joined the team, was always eager, his eyes lighting up whenever I shared how emotional marketing could change someone's life. And then there was Mark from the marketing department, always ready to help me analyze the market and catch every shifting trend. I remember vividly the day our campaign was launched. The meeting room was packed, the lights shone brightly, and the senior directors sat lined up at the front. When the commercial finished playing, the room erupted into thunderous applause. The CEO personally shook hands with each member of the creative team. He looked at me, smiling proudly, and said, "Rachel, this is incredible. This will change the entire trajectory of our company." In that moment, I thought all the sleepless nights, the silent sacrifices, and the exhaustion had finally been rewarded. But glory, as it turned out, was just a fragile mask. Only a week after the launch, as I was preparing for the project's wrap-up meeting, a short email from Walker landed in my inbox. The meeting was abruptly canceled. Instead, I was requested to appear at Human Resources the next morning. I stood frozen in front of the screen, my hand trembling as I held a cup of cold coffee. A thin thread of dread coiled silently around me, invisible but suffocating. The next morning, the HR office was cold and empty, except for Walker sitting there, his face detached as if he had never shared friendly lunches or long conversations about loyalty in the creative industry. Next to him sat the HR representative with a thick folder. I sat down, feeling like I was in free fall. Walker looked straight at me without hesitation and said, "We feel that you no longer align with the new creative direction of the company. Your recent performance shows signs of stagnation. We ask that you hand over all projects and accept the severance support." I heard the sound of papers rustling, the scratch of a pen signing documents, and the heavy thud of my own heartbeat. I almost laughed. Stagnation. The project I had just led had broken the company's quarterly revenue records. The CEO had praised me in front of the entire leadership just days ago. I wanted to stand up and argue, but when I met Walker's calm, ruthless gaze, I understood This was not a conversation. This was a verdict that had already been decided. I signed the resignation papers in a daze. As I walked out, I saw Alex standing in the hallway, holding the documents I had prepared for the wrap-up meeting. He turned away when he met my eyes, quickly melting into the crowd. The feeling of betrayal did not hit like a punch. It crept in like a thin blade slicing through the fragile trust that had already begun to crack inside me. It dawned on me that I had been robbed. Alex, Walker, and even the colleagues who once stood by my side had quietly pushed me out of the project I had nurtured with all my heart. The day I packed up and left the old company, not a single teammate came to see me off. The averted gazes, the stiff nods, the pitiful looks from a distance, all felt like invisible knives cutting into my pride. I left in silence under a gray sky, a light drizzle soaking the streets, carrying a small box filled with memories I had once thought would accompany me throughout my career. When I got home, I collapsed on the floor with my back against the door, my arms hanging limply. My phone screen lit up with hollow messages from HR, wishing you the best on your next journey. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoed through the empty room. My mother called, her voice full of worry. I could not bring myself to say a word. I just sat there in silence. The faith I had spent years building, in the company, in my teammates, in the value of honesty, crumbled all at once. That night, I sat on my bed, staring blankly at the white wall. My mind was empty, no anger, no sadness, only a cold void spreading through my chest. I had believed that if I worked hard enough and stayed true, recognition would come. I had naively thought that emotional marketing would cherish those who still believed in the genuine connection between people. I was wrong, and worse. I had lost not just my job, but a part of myself, the part that had believed broken trust could be mended. Outside the window, the rain kept falling quietly, without end. I knew that my life had just entered a new chapter, a chapter I had never anticipated, a chapter that began with betrayal, failure, and an unceremonious ending. But deep beneath that cold numbness, something very small and fragile was still flickering quietly, something not easily extinguished, not quite hope, not quite anger, just a soft whisper in the back of my mind. That maybe this was not the end. There are days when waking up to emptiness feels heavier than any nightmare. I lay in bed, the pale morning light seeping through the curtains and casting faint streaks across the wall. It felt as if I had lost my way somewhere between pain and numbness. My work, my colleagues, the years I had devoted to building something meaningful, all seemed to vanish into nothingness overnight. That betrayal had not only taken away a chair in an office, but it also stripped me of a piece of self-respect I once thought was untouchable. A week passed, and I did not leave the house. Messages of concern from friends gradually faded into silence, as if they too did not know how to face my failure. Long nights found me sitting still by the window, a cup of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the distant city lights, wondering how one could stand up again after trust had been shattered so completely. One afternoon, while absent-mindedly scrolling through news headlines on my phone, I stumbled upon an article about entrepreneurship. A single line in the piece cut through me like a thin blade. No one can take away the true value you have built unless you allow them to. I put the phone down. My hand clenched until the knuckles turned white. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for a miracle. Maybe it was time to find myself again, even if it meant starting from zero. The next morning, for the first time in days, I dressed properly, tied my hair neatly, and brewed myself a hot cup of coffee. My reflection in the mirror still looked tired, But somewhere behind those weary eyes, a faint spark had begun to flicker. I opened my laptop, created a new file, and typed at the top, "The Grand Comeback Plan." My fingers still trembled, but I knew exactly where I needed to begin. Anger was not enough. Pain was not enough. If I wanted revenge through success, I had to rebuild from the roots. I dug through all my old projects, all the campaigns that had once been celebrated. I found undeniable traces of my contribution in them, from the early drafts to the initial ideas that later turned into viral campaigns. I gathered every piece of evidence, every internal email, every acknowledgement that the old company had not yet erased in their haste to cast me aside. Every line, every number felt like fallen fragments of a past I needed to piece together to reclaim my voice. But documents alone were not enough. I knew I needed something bigger, a reason to exist stronger than the pain. I spent days reading about the latest trends in emotional marketing. I realized that while my old company remained obsessed with safe campaigns, the market was shifting. Customers no longer sought mere gloss. They craved authenticity. They yearned for stories that touched the heart. The market was hungering for exactly what I had always believed in. And maybe that gap was my chance to begin again. That evening, I sat by my desk under the soft glow of a small yellow lamp, scribbling ideas onto sheets of paper. I sketched the first outlines of a brand new marketing company, a place that would not sell polished illusions, but genuine connection. A place where emotional marketing was not just a slogan, but the very breath of every project. I had no illusions that starting a company would be easy. I had learned, all too painfully, that the outside world was harsher than anyone cared to admit. But this time, I had nothing left to lose, and sometimes, having nothing left to lose is a terrifying kind of power. Reality, however, hit harder than I had anticipated. I sent applications to small investment funds only to receive polite rejections. A few old acquaintances, when hearing about my new idea, merely chuckled and changed the subject. Some even bluntly warned me that with a quiet departure from my previous company, regaining the trust of partners would be nearly impossible. Those words hammered at my already fractured pride. There were nights when I sat curled up on the floor, questioning whether I was deluding myself with a foolish dream. One afternoon, while wandering through a marketing seminar, I ran into Mark. He looked awkward seeing me, but lacked the patience to fake courtesy for long. After a few polite greetings, Mark casually mentioned that the old company was preparing to launch a new campaign, one that I recognized immediately from a few hints as a stolen version of my old drafts. My heart clenched. Not only had they taken my career, but they continued to steal what I had created during my most painful days. That night, I sat alone in the darkness of my small apartment. I recalled Walker's gaze on the day I signed the resignation papers. Cold, calculated. It was not disappointment over a failing employee. It was satisfaction at removing a thorn from his side. I finally understood. I had not been pushed out because I was weak. I had been pushed out because I was strong, because I held something they could not control. True value. I reopened my startup plan, typing in each goal and strategy one by one. I would not beg anyone to believe in me. I would let results speak for themselves. I would build a small company first, but one of true quality. I would create emotional marketing campaigns so genuine that even if no one knew my name, they would not be able to ignore the impact. But to do that, I needed a first project, a spark to reignite my blurred name. I started actively seeking out small businesses, brands struggling to find their footing. I knocked on every door, undeterred by rejection, and finally, a small coffee shop agreed to give me a chance. A modest brand, but one with a story that could touch hearts. I knew that if I did well, this would become the launching pad for a spectacular comeback. As I sat in that coffee shop, the warm yellow lights reflecting off a steaming cup of coffee, I felt more clearly than ever that this was not just a contract. This was proof that I had not been defeated, that even when everything around me had tried to drag me down, something inside me was still burning. The first fall hurt like nothing else, but not every fall is the end. Some falls are the beginning of a journey to find yourself again, a journey you must sometimes walk alone in the dark, with no guide, no comfort, only yourself, your unhealed wounds, and your unfinished dreams, biting down hard and pressing forward. And I, Rachel Holm, had chosen to move forward. There are moments when you think you are piecing your life back together from the wreckage, only to realize that reality holds even deeper layers than what the eye can see. After a month of pouring my heart into the first project for that small coffee shop, the emotional marketing campaign I created began to ripple outward. A short film telling the story of the owner's tough journey to start the cafe touched the hearts of thousands. Customers flocked there, not just for the coffee, but because they saw themselves reflected in those simple dreams. Local media outlets started mentioning the campaign as a refreshing breeze amid the hollow noise of traditional advertising. When I first saw one of those articles, I sat quietly before the screen, a strange feeling rising in my chest. It was not pride, nor was it gloating, but a profound calmness that I could not quite name. I knew then that true value still had a place in this world, and perhaps, if I was patient enough, it would find the recognition it deserved. But I also sensed that an undercurrent was forming, one that would bring changes I could not yet foresee. A week later, just as I was preparing for my next campaign, an unexpected message arrived from an old colleague. It was just a few words, but they made my heart race. "They are in serious trouble," I called back, a flood of anticipation and caution swirling inside me. On the other end, the voice was low, almost a whisper. The old company, the one that had discarded me so ruthlessly, had just suffered a major failure with a new campaign. They had launched a product with a poorly copied version of one of my old drafts, without me to lead it, without the careful touch in each detail. The campaign backfired. Negative reactions spread like wildfire across social media. Customers accused them of insincerity, and the media questioned their authenticity. Leadership panicked, and Walker struggled to find an explanation. I sat there, my hand gripping the coffee cup tightly, emotions surging within me. Maybe, for the first time, justice was quietly speaking without me needing to demand it. But that satisfaction was fleeting. I knew real victory was not about watching those who betrayed me fall. It was about walking steadily on the path I had chosen. Life, however, was not done testing me. Just days after the news broke, an unexpected opportunity came my way. A startup in the education sector, having heard about the coffee shop campaign, reached out to invite me to lead a major project for them. They did not want formulaic marketing tactics. They wanted an authentic approach, a story that would genuinely move hearts. I accepted, not out of ambition, but because I knew that step by step, I was rebuilding the faith in true value that others had once tried to erase. As I dove into the second project, the turmoil on the other side grew even more intense. An old acquaintance whispered to me that Walker was under immense pressure from the executive board, not just because of the failed campaign, but because major contracts were stalling and partners were beginning to question his leadership. Rumors swirled that Walker had systematically pushed capable individuals out of the company for fear of being overshadowed. And as the light began to shine into those dark corners, the hidden shadows could no longer stay concealed. One afternoon, While meeting with my new project team at the familiar coffee shop, I overheard my name in a conversation at a nearby table. A group of former colleagues, unaware of my presence, were discussing how many major clients were now demanding to work with the creator of the real emotional campaign. And no one at the old company dared to falsely claim that title anymore. They whispered that Rachel Holm might be preparing for a spectacular comeback. I lowered my gaze to hide a small smile, feeling a bittersweet calm wash over me. I had never sought fame by stepping on the failures of others, but the truth, once strong enough, finds its own way to surface. At that very moment, another message arrived, this time from Mark, a hesitant message, as if he had struggled for a long time before sending it. If there is ever a chance, I would like to work with you again. I did not rush to reply. I knew that those who turned away when you fell do not change easily after a few storms. But I also knew that some relationships could be reborn if rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than exploitation. While the old company continued its downward spiral, I poured my energy into completing the second campaign. For the first time in months, I no longer felt alone. I assembled a team of young collaborators, people untouched by office politics, people who believed that emotional marketing was not just a sales tool, but a bridge connecting lost souls. We worked through the nights, arguing, debating, laughing, crying over the real-life stories we wanted to tell. The campaign launched on a June evening. It was not grand or filled with fireworks. It was simply a short video sharing the journey of underprivileged children rising through education. But within 3 days, it had been shared millions of times, not because of a massive budget, but because it touched the softest scars within the hearts of viewers. Articles praising a new, more human approach to marketing flooded in, and this time, my name stood there, clear and undeniable. I soon heard that news of the campaign had reached the leadership of my old company. A close source told me Walker had called an emergency meeting, desperately trying to patch together salvage plans, but all efforts fell into silence. Clients withdrew, the company's reputation crumbled, and for the first time in many years, Walker's position truly began to shake. Amidst the chaos, an official invitation landed in my inbox from a prestigious marketing association. They wanted me to share my experience about building campaigns rooted in personal resilience, about the power of true value in a noisy, superficial world. As I read that email, I knew my spectacular comeback was entering a new chapter, a chapter that no one, not Walker, not the old company, not anyone could deny. I closed my laptop and lifted my head to gaze out the window. The sky was deepening into a rich, solemn blue. Inside me, there was no longer anger as in those early days. Instead, there was a strange tranquility. I no longer needed to prove to those who had turned their backs that they were wrong. I only needed to prove to myself that they had never been able to touch the core of who I was. The game was not over, but this time, the stage had shifted, and I, Rachel Holm, was no longer playing by their rules. I was writing new rules of my own. There were nights when I sat alone in my small apartment, the warm light casting a faint glow across unfinished plans, my heart stirring like the surface of a lake before a storm. There were no more sobs, no more shattered dreams, only a silence pressed deep within, the kind of silence that belongs to someone who has walked through the very end of hurt and is quietly preparing for a comeback that would leave no room for mercy. I knew that opportunities did not come by chance. They had to be crafted through steady breaths and unwavering steps, and I knew that now. I was ready to step into the final game. One Monday morning, before the sunlight could dry the streaks of rain left on the window from the night before, A special email arrived in my inbox. An international media company was planning an expansion into the domestic market, and they needed a strategic partner, someone not only with expertise, but with a deep understanding of emotional marketing at the local level. The person who had recommended me was none other than a former client, someone I had quietly helped through a crisis the previous year, someone who had witnessed firsthand how I had held on to true values, even when everything else seemed to turn away. I read the email again and again, each line pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. This was not just a project, it was a door. It was a true stage for the comeback I had been preparing for through all the months of silence. But I also understood that stepping through that door meant facing the ghosts of my past. The old company, Walker, Alex, they were still there. Even if their forms had changed, I would not just be competing. I would be confronting those who had once pushed me to the bottom to cling to their positions. I hesitated for a long time before replying. Part of me, the part that had been betrayed, still wavered, fearful of being wounded again. But the other part, the one that had grown in the quiet, knew that there was no moving forward without facing it head on. I replied to the email with a calmness I had never known before. No eagerness, no insecurity, just a clear confirmation and a detailed schedule for the first meeting. As I hit send, I felt like I was laying the first cornerstone of the bridge to the next chapter of my life. The meeting took place at a 5-star hotel, bathed in natural light and filled with soft murmurs. I entered in a simple suit, my hair neatly tied, my gaze steady. Across the table sat the leadership team of the international company, sharp-eyed, observant, yet respectful. I presented the plan using a language honed over hundreds of sleepless nights, shaped by experiences that could not be replicated, delivered with an authenticity that no school could teach. I spoke not only of successes, but also of failures, of the price of protecting true values in a world that favored compromise. I did not try to hide the scars. I let them stand, an undeniable part of the journey. When the meeting ended, the leader of their team shook my hand, a silent recognition sparkling in his eyes. In that moment, I knew they had seen me, not a manufactured version, not a rumor, but me, whole and unrepentant. 1 week later, the contract was officially signed. I was given full creative control over their first domestic campaign, a campaign that would not only reshape their brand image, but would also serve as a declaration that Rachel Holm was back. And this time, no one would easily erase her again. But before I could celebrate, an unexpected event unfolded. An internal media outlet published an investigative report exposing the power manipulation within my former company. Stories surfaced about how Walker had systematically removed talented people to build his own circle, about how repeated failures stemmed from a lack of innovation. These accounts were backed by anonymous but powerful testimonies. Among the campaigns most heavily criticized were ones I had once helped build, only to have my name erased from their records. The news spread like wildfire through a dry forest. Major clients quickly announced the termination of their contracts. The executive board launched an internal investigation. It did not take long before Walker was officially suspended pending a full inquiry. I received the news while sitting with my new team, planning the next campaign. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. Only a strange calm filled me, as if a heavy chapter had finally been turned. That night, I stood by the window, the city lights sparkling like falling stars. I thought about the journey I had traveled, the times I had fallen, the wounds that had yet to heal. I thought about the people who had turned their backs when I needed them most, and also about the strangers who had extended a hand just when I was about to give up. Suddenly, Everything became clear, like a lake after the storm. I had walked through the darkness, not to become someone else, but to become more fully myself, stronger and more whole. I knew that tomorrow, when my new campaign officially launched, many eyes would be watching. There would be eyes filled with surprise, eyes filled with doubt, even eyes filled with envy. But none of that mattered anymore. This time, I was not walking to seek acceptance from anyone. I was walking to fulfill my own mission, to prove that sometimes. It is through the cracks in our hearts that the first light enters. The turning point had come, and I, Rachel Holm, was ready to return, no longer as someone seeking recognition, but as someone who would create true value with her own hands. There are mornings when you wake up and know for certain that you no longer belong to the old places, not because you hate the past, nor because you need to run away, but simply because you have grown beyond the limits that once confined you. I felt that very clearly on the day our new campaign officially launched. The early sunlight filtered through the windows of our small office, casting thin beams onto the walls, as if the sky itself was witnessing a quiet yet steady beginning. That morning, when my team and I stood before the computers and pressed the button to publish the campaign, no one said a word. Only a thick silence filled the room, carrying within it all the waiting, the hopes, and the silent fears of people who had poured their entire hearts into something greater than themselves. The campaign spread faster than we had anticipated. Stories of rising from failure, of sincere testimonies from small but resilient people, touched the hearts of hundreds of thousands within just a few days. Major media outlets began to call it a new wave, with one publication even suggesting that we had breathed new life into an industry that was slowly losing its soul. I did not need to seek out news about the old company. The news found me. They held a press conference to try and manage the crisis of trust, but the public apology from the leadership only exposed their panic more clearly. Walker quietly disappeared from the company website without any official announcement. Some whispered that he had been forced to leave under pressure and in solitude, with nothing left to cling to. Alex was swiftly reassigned to a powerless department. His reputation and the opportunities that had once been laid out like a red carpet, now drifting away like a silent breeze leaving no trace. I did not celebrate their downfall. When I saw those reports, I simply sat quietly, brewed myself a cup of hot tea, and watched the thin trails of steam rise into the morning light. I knew that the greatest punishment for a traitor was not external retribution, but the loss of respect and trust that they once so easily possessed. No career could be salvaged once trust had been broken. No apology could fill the void that deceit left behind. In the weeks that followed, I received numerous interview requests, collaboration offers, even larger investment proposals from my fledgling company. But this time, I did not rush into the whirlwind of ambition. I chose carefully, keeping only relationships that were genuine, with partners who truly believed in real value rather than chasing fleeting glory. I understood now that true success is not measured by how high you climb, but by how much of yourself you manage to hold on to along the way. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a seminar on entrepreneurial experiences, I received a message from Mark. He wrote only one line: "I am truly sorry for not standing by you when you needed it most." I stared at that message for a long time before replying. I did not need belated apologies, but I understood that sometimes words are not meant to fix the past, but to acknowledge that truth, even when late, still holds its own value. I replied simply, "I forgave you a long time ago, Mark. We have all learned our lessons." Then I put the phone down, feeling a layer of invisible weight lift from my chest. On the day I stepped onto the seminar stage, standing before hundreds of expectant eyes, I did not speak about my victories. I spoke about my failures, the sleepless nights, the moments when giving up seemed inevitable. I spoke about losing faith and the long, painstaking journey of reclaiming it, not through rebellion or bitter revenge, but through quietly rebuilding from the smallest fragments. When I finished my talk, the room fell silent for a long moment before the applause rose. It was not frenzied cheering. It was a deep, silent recognition from people who had once found themselves lost in this chaotic world. That evening, when I returned home, I stood on the balcony, gazing at the city lights stretching to the horizon like fallen stars. I knew the road ahead was still long. There would be more challenges, more unexpected turns, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned how to stand firm in the storm. I had learned that sometimes revenge through success is not about defeating others. It is about keeping the fire within yourself alive. It is about proving that even after rejection and hurt, you can still stage a magnificent comeback built on kindness and an unshakable spirit. Walker and those who had once betrayed me had likely faded into their own separate paths by now, like leaves carried away by an old season's wind. I no longer cared whether they regretted their actions or whether they even remembered me, because in the end, the most enduring existence does not live in someone else's memory. It lives in the way you keep moving forward, even when no one is watching, even when you are walking alone. I sipped my tea, the gentle aroma drifting into the cool night air. A thought passed quietly through my mind, not hurried, not boastful, just like a whisper to myself, that life is not measured by how many times you fall, but by how many times you rise, smile, and keep walking. And perhaps, as I had once learned from old wounds, the most beautiful light always enters through the places that hurt the most. If you have ever been betrayed, ever pushed to the bottom just for believing in kindness, do not lose hope. Your story is not over. It has only just begun.